Hello, welcome to the Dark Path podcast.
Hello, Douklias. Thanks for having me.
Well, thanks for coming in. Yeah, today I'm sitting here with George Douklias. Said that right?
You got it.
All right, George is the CEO and founder of the Jabless Jobs employment company, you'd say, employment
We're a
services?
non-discriminatory employment service.
Non-discriminatory employment service. All right, cool. I met George at an event for Renata Seekman when she was running for the People's Party of Canada candidacy in the Quadra Vancouver riding, and since then I have been following Jabless Jobs, and it's quite dramatic growth and popularity, and I thought it would be wonderful to talk to you about it because it seems like a really interesting, and what I expect would be a turn in your life you didn't expect, that it sort of popped into the possibilities due to the circumstances that came into all of our lives, and you're in that sense.
Well, yeah, I mean, I certainly wasn't planning on it. There's two sides to it. I mean, it was the turn in my life came from having to react to a circumstance that I was put under, and the entrepreneurial side saw it shortly after as an opportunity that was basically gift wrapped to me by the government.
That's interesting. So are you an entrepreneur generally? That's previously?
Yep, I am now.
You are now?
Yeah.
So is this your first foray into actual...
Yep, I've
Really?
never been a business owner before.
Wow.
Yeah.
Oh, okay. Well, can I ask what you did before?
Well, right before I started Jabless Jobs when I was working for a small cleaning business here in Vancouver. We were cleaning the exteriors of buildings, mostly small buildings, small mansions. Well, mansions.
Yeah, sure.
Small buildings.
Yeah.
I wasn't doing any of the rope climbing or anything, but there was some ladder work. But it's, cleaning windows, pressure washing,
Huh.
that sort of stuff. That's what I was doing before.
Yeah, I've had a lot of jobs like that, mostly landscaping on my end of things, but I get it. Well, yeah, I mean, let's go back to 2020 when all of this stuff started to happen. I know when it first showed up in my life, I was shocked and concerned because it was new information and I didn't know what to make of it. And I think a lot of people sort of feel that way about it. But then as it kind of carried on, I started seeing that there's holes in this story and there's problems with this and that. And I became more and more concerned. And the thing that actually stimulated me to even start the podcast largely was the vaccine mandates and the idea that your life would be so tied to whether or not you got the vaccine that whether you can make a living or not would be part of that question. And that really concerned me because this is very serious stuff and has serious ramifications. So can you talk about your journey in that way and how you got to make those decisions?
From 2020?
Sure.
Well, I think I can say that I was mostly like anyone else. I was a little concerned, curious, somewhat entertained, and uncertain. In March of 2020, it was 2 years ago now.
Yeah.
I think we just passed the 2-year anniversary.
We did.
Famous weekend.
Yes.
I've been a news guy in the past, so I made sure that I watched every podcast, every press conference that I could. And I was working construction here in Vancouver at the time. I was with the drilling division. And everyone stopped working except for me. Construction kept going.
Right. Yeah.
I almost ran out of toilet paper, but then some magically appeared on a shelf at a grocery store, and so that was my biggest scare. And then I just carried on. I had a best case scenario and a worst case scenario in the first couple weeks of COVID. My best case scenario is that we would just sort of go through a little bump like that for a couple weeks and or a month, and then we'd all go back to normal as it was, and it would be look at it as like I even forget some of those older viruses that went around, SARS.
Oh, the original one, yeah,
all
sure.
those early ones,
Yeah.
that we heard about over the last 20 years, and then we just move on, But it carried on. So I had a worst case scenario was that, unfortunately, I think I was right with that one, is that it was going to be the start of a new and long drawn out era. And I think we're in the thick of it now.
I'm gonna think of something.
So I was working construction, and that went on for a while. I got a bad injury in June of 2020, which I mean it's complicated. I don't want to get too into it much, but I was laid out for the summer of 2020, and I didn't watch the news much, and I was living alone, so I just sort of let the world go by.
Okay.
Late fall of 2020, I was getting back on my feet again. And now we're going into November of 2020, and I'd only been in Vancouver for a year. And having worked the previous winter, and then COVID hit, and leg injury, I still hadn't really met anybody. And I was alone in living in my place, going to start work, and because of COVID and all there was some supply chain issues with construction materials. Some developers held back on certain projects, so I found myself laid off in Vancouver without knowing anybody. That's when I really started to have time to like, hey, this COVID thing is still going on. You know, I leaned into it a little bit, and I realized that kids are still having issues at school. Small businesses are still locked down around the country, and those are my two big concerns. Those grew into my two biggest concerns, two really only concerns going on into 2021, January, February. That's what I was thinking about, was what kids are going through and the economic problems that could come from the restrictions on small business across Canada. And so a few months later, as my concerns naturally grew, I was trying to get information on these two topics over time. I heard of a rally happening here in Vancouver, and it's almost the 1 year anniversary of it. It was on April 2nd. I went to a Save Small Business BC rally here. I thought I could get, that's one thing I could get behind.
Sure.
I didn't want to get involved in some of the bigger pictures, some of the predictions people were making. I just didn't even want to go down that rabbit hole, and I still don't. And that small business rally was like, I could get behind that, and I want to.
Okay.
So I did. I went to that small business rally, and it was awesome. I realized I'm not the only one who was thinking these things. I'm not a business owner, but I'm a customer to business owners, and I'm a citizen of Canada, and it was all very concerning. So I had every right to be there as much as any business owner. And I got behind that one, and I photographed. I like to do photography once in a while, so that was my way of contributing. I photographed the event, went on the march, and was really moved by the speeches, was really moved by the energy. I think it was safe to say that was my very first Vancouver experience, after almost being here for a year and a half.
Interesting.
And when I really got a taste of Vancouver culture and people for the first time. I went home, and that was Easter weekend, so there wasn't much going on for me. I'm Orthodox, so my Easter was a few weeks later.
Okay.
So I just sat at home, and I edited my photos, realized I had a beginning, a middle, and an end, a narrative to my photos. And I started writing about what I saw in my photos and what I experienced there, and I accumulated it into a story. It's about a 1,500 word story, and I put it online, and a week later or so, I got contacted by True North News.
Oh yeah.
And then they wanted to publish it, and they did. And then throughout that week, those couple weeks, my photos started floating around Vancouver, and I got introduced to the people in the movement as a photojournalist and a writer, and that's where I was at. By early summer of 2021, I was photographing rallies, and I was the journalist kind of guy. And I was looking for opportunities to make a visual record, and of everything going on, and I was writing about it. I was making a lot of notes at home, so I thought I'd put a narrative together and make a record of things. I still could. I was reading a lot of Joan Gideon at the time. I really loved the way she writes, so I was putting a lot of inclusion in my writing, where that new journalism style can go off about that. But and that's what I was doing. Had to work in the meantime. Got a job with my friend in the summer of 2021, and he knew where I stood on things. We grew up together. We went to kindergarten together in Winnipeg. And he's an old friend. He's been out here for 20 years. He's a really great guy. We disagreed on a lot of things, but he really, we still accepted each other. But we had the vaccine talk before I started working for him. And my plan then was to wait 2 years. I assessed myself. I was exercising a lot at the time. I wasn't a smoker, wasn't overweight. I believe in intermittent fasting. And I realized my age and the data we had publicly available on COVID at the time, I concluded that I was not at risk of dying. I was also not at risk of taking up space in a hospital. And I knew that. What I didn't know is what taking the shot might do to me. So I wanted to go with what I know. I also wasn't in contact with any elders. I lived alone. I wasn't in contact with a lot of people. So I was not a high risk to society. It was not a high risk to myself or to the system. However, and I knew that was a certainty. What wasn't a certainty was what would happen if I took the vaccine. So I decided to wait 2 years, and I think I'm still waiting on that. I said by July of 2023, I'll see how things play out, and that's when I'll make a decision. I'm leaving it open till then. So had that talk with my friend, who's very pro-vaccine. He's I would call him a very polite and open-minded Fauci disciple. Okay. He's a good guy. I don't want to degrade him in any way, but we strongly disagreed on the subject.
Well, that's just a good point to make in that, and just alone is, hey, you can disagree about it and you can still be good friends, have a good relationship, and that people need to remember that. And that's interesting, very interesting.
So a few weeks later, I was talking again with this friend of mine, and he was telling me he's having trouble finding guys for his cleaning business. And I said, well, I'm available. I'm long list of work experience, pretty decent resume for, so it fit right in with what he was doing. So I had a meeting with him and his general manager. My buddy was the owner of the company, is the owner of the company, and they decided to hire me as management. And I was so shortly after that, I was in training to be a manager in his company. On my first day of training, I felt safe with all the looming talk about mandates and stuff. This is early August 2021. I felt safe with that leading into the job because we had already had the talk. He knew where I stood, but yet he was still hiring me. So I saw that as a good thing, and I felt safe about that. On my very first day of work, my very first day of training, he started pressuring me to get it. And I said, let's just end this now because we're going to have a conflict. I'm not doing that. I told you I'm going to wait 2 years. You knew where I stood on this. And he didn't want to discuss it very much, but he did leave it at saying, we're going to pressure you. We're going to pressure you. I believe he used that word. We're gonna pressure you into getting it. And then he wanted to move on. He didn't want to talk about it anymore after that. And so I carried on with my management training over the next couple of weeks, but I certainly didn't feel a sense of job security. That's when I started looking online. That's when the idea of where do I find a job board that represents someone like me? A job board where I can find a job that an employer is not going to ask me about my private medical information. I certainly did not support having to disclose that. And I wasn't finding anything online. there was some stuff on Telegram, and they were evolving into. They had some titles that seemed to match the narrative about what I was looking for, but they would just evolve into a discussion forum. And when you're looking for a job that you can take a bus to, you don't really care about what's happening around the world. You know, there's another place and an important place for discussion forums, but not on a job board.
Sure.
So I was wondering what to do about that or how to get around that, and I kept looking. It got frustrating. So I thought I should use Telegram to make a job board and make it in a way where people can't post on it or try to really police it somehow. And so I left my thought for a while, left my mind for a while. I carried on working. I was working full time, and you know, you don't really have time for hobbies. Working labor full time.
Yep.
So it just left me for a week or two, and then one morning I was up really early as normal, and I was in the bathroom washing my face, and I wasn't trying to come up with a name. I wasn't looking to make the job board. It felt like I think I even had forgotten about it for a few days. I wasn't even thinking about it. And the name just fell into my head. I was just washing my face, and I said the word in my head for the first time, Jabless Jobs. And I went, oh, that's a good name.
Interesting.
And I finished up and washing my face, dried off, and I grabbed my phone and I went into the kitchen and I played around with starting a group on Telegram called Jabless Jobs.
Okay.
Made the group, found some image online to give it a profile photo, and called it Jabless Jobs, and then I shared it with a few friends on Telegram. One of them was the organizer of that Save Small Business rally in April 2nd, who I'd come to know and respect, like many people, since that day. And she suggested, I told her what it was. She loved it. She loved the name. She loved what I was doing. I had a lot of great encouragement from the few people I shared it with. And then I told her what my vision was to have a job board that people can't post on, or I don't want it to turn into a discussion forum. I was worried that it would just get so noisy, so I wanted to start my own thing that wouldn't be noisy. And then so that I can find myself a job, hoping that an employer would post on there so that I can apply for that job and then just carry on with my life and mind my own business. A couple days later, she suggested that I change it from a group to a channel on Telegram, and that would prevent people from posting. The only difference is I would be the admin, and then people would have to message me with their job posting, and then I would put it on there, and that would give me the opportunity to vet it.
Yep.
That was the birth of me running the job board.
I see, yeah.
And that was August 24th.
Oh.
She messaged me on the night of the 23rd, like 11 o'clock. I was sound asleep. I woke up at 4 a.m. like normal, and I saw her message, and I went, damn, that's a good idea. Let's see if I can do that. So, I went and I made that channel, and I closed down the group one, and invited some friends to join. By the time I got to work, I had 18 subscribers on that channel. And by noon that day, I had 400 subscribers on that channel. Wow. And 3 jobs posted. Wow. And wow. It was one of those times where they don't happen very often, where you just tapped into something. You found a crystal ball. I got trapped lightning in a bottle or something. I wasn't sure. It was a bit of excitement. It was a bit of concern. Okay. And it's in my pocket the whole morning. I'm sure. Yeah. It was in my phone, and all this all going down on my phone. Yeah. So I realized I had not just something unique, but something very important to people. Yeah. And a couple days later, I got the message from the boss.
The boss?
The general manager of the company, was still in training.
Oh, right. Okay. Yes.
He says to me, he says the email sent, there was a message sent out to all the staff saying, you're all going to have to be vaccinated. Those of you who are not vaccinated will have restrictions. A couple of days earlier, around those days, I don't remember what, I think it was that same day even, I don't know, it's a little blurry now, but Premier Horgan made the announcement that mandates are going to be implemented on September 13th. Here we are in the last week of August. And so I got that message from the manager, and I'm not cool with that, you know, because if I'm going to continue on with this management training and have my own crew, I'll have restrictions placed on me. If things work out, the best case scenario with my friend was that things work out and I work with restrictions, and not only that, I'd have to implement those restrictions, enforce them on my crew.
Yeah.
And I was not cool with that, not doing it. So I thought long and hard. Meanwhile, you know, notifications on my phone keep going.
I bet.
People are messaging me. I'm getting, by that point, I started seeing the emotional response to it. The messages from people. I just was blown away, like how much it actually meant to people, the hope it was giving to people. It was very special to see that. It was a very unique period of time. They were crying. People were coming to me, and still are, with their hearts on their sleeves.
Yeah.
You know, I don't have kids or a mortgage, but many people do.
Yeah.
And they're not willing to take the risk, and they were in a much tougher spot than I was.
Yeah.
So I was watching this, and I realized like what I had there. I'm still trying to like process how important it is what I got, and I just went home that night from work, and I thought like they're gonna do this. They're dropping the hammer on us, man. Like, so the next morning when I was at work, I wasn't even there. I was there, but I wasn't starting yet. I pulled out my phone and I sent a message to the general manager saying, I can't be a part of this company anymore. This is medical discrimination. I won't be doing this. This is my notice. I thought it was the better move, and I still think it was the better move because I didn't want a conflict with my old friend. I didn't want to rock the boat, and I didn't want to have to challenge his income. But I knew they were short-staffed and they had a lot of jobs coming up. So the general manager replied back. He thought I was joking.
Interesting. Interesting.
And like, no, I'm serious, man. I'm not going to be a part of this medical discrimination. It's what it is. I'm not doing it. I'm sorry, this is my notice. I wanted to be fair, and so I gave them a 1 month notice, basically the end of September. And a couple days later, I got an email from the manager saying there's a surprise shortage of work. George, you're laid off. And I knew that wasn't true. So it is what it is.
Yeah.
That gave me an opportunity to really double down on Jabless jobs. I took it and ran. Renata, who you mentioned earlier, she told me that I should register the name. I got something special there. I wasn't thinking about making a business. I still wanted to find a job. You know, and I thought I'd pass it on to someone who could possibly do a better job than me, someone who's owned a business before, someone who's has a lot more tech experience than me. You know, so I just still was, you know, trying to make it grow because people liked it, people wanted it. It was an important thing, but I also wanted to, I was still looking for a job for the first couple of weeks of September. And Renata told me that I got a business opportunity here, and I didn't want to hear that, but she was right. She told me that I need to get that name reserved as soon as possible. I didn't even know how to do that. So with some research, I figured out how to do that, and I got the name reserved, so I officially owned the name in mid-September, Jabless Jobs. And then I went on wondering how I was going to monetize, because volunteering like that, I mean, you wouldn't believe the emails I was getting at the time. Like I'd made a Greater Vancouver Jabless Jobs Gmail account, and then by that time we had a Okanagan, Jabless Jobs Okanagan, we had a Vancouver Island, I think, so it was growing.
Yeah.
And I was getting emails from people just nonstop, just all day long. It was just like my job was on email, and vetting jobs that people are sending me, giving people hope, people pouring out their concerns to me, telling them they're not alone, telling them that I'm working hard, doing what I can. That's when a lot of our company phrase and languages came about, letting people know that we'll win this together. I'm going to make sure that you have the choice, so therefore the choice is yours. That's the language we use on our website. That's our phrases now. It all grew quite organically. And thinking hard about how I was going to monetize it, I was concerned because I thought I didn't want to come across as some, money hungry opportunist either. I sincerely did not start Jabless Jobs as a business. I started it to find myself a job. So I started looking at how I could monetize it. I really just thought, okay, maybe it could just be advertising. Maybe companies could advertise with us, or people who have services that cater to this marginalized community that's my audience, they could maybe advertise to it. I got a lot of rent to pay. I was falling behind. I barely ate in September, man. It was rough. In September of 2021, it's a miracle I lived through that month. It was crazy.
Yeah.
I remember just looking at my fridge. It was like just nothing in there and no money coming in.
Yeah.
It's just it was really like a mess. I just did not know how I was going to make it into October with the rent looming and stuff. And so luckily I was able to tap into my eye in time, and then I just scraped by. Fortunately, I'd grown accustomed to intermittent fasting. By that point, I was intermittent fasting purely out of necessity.
Oh, jeez.
And still had my coffee, which is fine, which was good. Fortunately, I don't have a car, so there wasn't that money pit. And I just had to get my rent paid and get some food in the fridge, and that happened. So incrementally, really. So then, by that point, I had a team put together as well.
Okay.
Melissa was part of us, who's a huge part of the company now. Steve, our IT guy, was dabbling in it. I didn't have a website yet, but he was just helping out in communications with people, and because it was just so time consuming while the emailing. And he was helping me, build new channels and giving me some IT ideas, and he was a little more tech savvy than I was, so if I had a hang up on a Telegram channel or something, he could answer my question or figure it out quicker than me. So Melissa came along with her ability to just create social media apps and Canva posts real quickly. So she can, I could forward her a job that someone emailed to me, and she could translate it into a colorful post on Canva, an image on Canva, which is how we were doing things then. And that was very time consuming for me, so she was able to save me a lot of time and offered some structure to our brand, some consistency. By that point we had social media going, Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram. Mostly we were working on Instagram, and so she was able to contribute to that, and it was during that time where our colors and our brand started to really form, the look of our brand started to really formulate, and I just started to steer it, and punks of employment is what I was saying. because we're not the regular employment service.
Oh, I see.
We're coming at it from the underground.
Yeah.
You know, I wanted to look like we're a professional company, of course, because we were treating it like a real job, and it was very important. But I didn't want us to look like any other job service or recruiting agency online. We're the punks. We're coming at it from another angle.
Interesting.
But we are professional, and we have the discipline.
Yeah.
So we were the alternative employment service. We still are. We're the alternative, not mainstream employment service, and that's when I came up with the term. You know, we're just a bunch of punks in this industry. So let's develop our brand towards being the punks of employment.
Interesting.
And let's go. And Steve had done a lot of hiring as a manager in the restaurant industry. I've done a lot of applying for jobs and resume making and interviewing. So Melissa had 4 years experience with the recruiting agency,
Okay.
and so we all just started finding our roles. I was at the helm. I took the lead. And Steve and Melissa both accepted that, and we're still a 3-person team. And then it just started to grow. Steve had some personal commitments, so he took most of October off. That was the time we started expanding out to reach out to volunteers. And while we were getting volunteers, it was me and Melissa juggling this stuff around. That was the one period in our existence where nothing got done. We ended up just having to deal with volunteers all the time, and they weren't able to get anything done. They were very motivated, but that was when I realized I'm seeing a lot of people trying to do too many things. I'm seeing a lot of people who are very motivated and capable, but yet not accomplishing anything because they're trying to do everything. Naturally, there was a need for everything, but I just turned to Melissa somewhere around late October, and maybe it was around the middle of October, I don't remember now, but I just said, we're not doing these volunteers anymore. She's just like, there's just a mountain of work to do. She was shocked. We weren't living together yet. She's my roommate now, but we were talking online a lot, and she just didn't believe that we could do this, and here's another period of uncertainty. I don't know that we can do it either, but I know that we could do more without these volunteers, because we're not getting anything done. So if the two of us just didn't have to deal with volunteers and just focused on what we wanted to do, we would still get more done without the volunteers, because we wouldn't have to deal with them.
Fair enough.
And nothing against them, they're all great, smart people, just that they were all doing too many things. By mid-October, I got on the federal registries and I incorporated it, made Jabless Jobs a company, and I told Melissa November 1st we're starting to charge. I don't know what we'll be charging yet, but that's how we're doing it. And so we had a benchmark and a goal, and I told her around the same time that we're not doing the volunteers anymore, and we're in a tricky period because I'm trying to monetize a volunteer-run organization, because I don't want to have to explain this to volunteers that we're gonna try and monetize this, and they're volunteering to help us. I just didn't know how to juggle that. Early shareholders options is one thing that came my way, but I had a lot of other things that I wanted to learn before that. And so I looked back at things that I already knew, and I started drawing analogies. I didn't want to start trying to do all these other things that people were asking me to do. All those emails I got, many of them were people asking me to expand Jabless Jobs into housing opportunities, travel opportunities. Do these employers enforce masks? And it's just like, I don't know that. I'm not doing all that. I just can't. I had to be realistic. While I was being asked these questions, I was watching these volunteers who were trying to work with us, not doing anything, but busy trying to do everything. And I just went, so our lane is employment, and we're not doing anything else. We're staying in the employment lane, and we're gonna have to just deflect every other opportunity and option that comes our way. And a lot of these opportunities are great. A lot of these questions were important. A lot of these people had great concerns.
Yeah.
And I just had to depend on someone else to start that because I'm sticking to employment. So we picked a lane and we stayed in it. We had a benchmark of a deadline to start charging. I don't know what we were going to charge, but then we just went for it. We developed a splash page. We got a website, a domain. We started just going for it, and the splash page was just a welcome page that said website coming, sign up for newsletter, and that was pretty much it. And that's when we started forming our brand. The background of Telegram is black, and we had already had the yellow logo, and then our posts were very colorful. Our job posts were very colorful. So I wanted to translate that whole look onto the website if and when we got there. So I let everyone know that we're going to try and just be familiar to our audience and just sort of translate our audience from Telegram over onto the website and maintain the look as much as we could. And so naturally it evolved, and so we did that. We got a job board going, and then right in the same week is when the media just slammed us. Like we got published on Rebel. We got attention from Global News, which was a fun time. We got it, so by the end of November, we were famous. November 1st, we started charging. November 5th, we made our first sale. We were still on Telegram then. Like people were paying me $50 to post their employment opportunities on Telegram. That was a confidence in market research.
Yeah.
Like if they're willing to pay me $50 to post their job opportunity on Telegram, then let's go for it. Let's throw some money. Got one investor, which is a small investment. He's a great guy. He was able to help us get out the gate with incorporating and buying a printer. Just some of the startup costs of that. I went and made a company bank account and just started doing everything for the first time. And by the end of November, we were famous and just trying to keep up.
Interesting.
Yeah.
Because one of the things about this whole process you went through in establishing this is it is tapping into a larger issue, of course, and one of the things that stands out about that issue that's really, I think, needs to be spoken about more, and is there's a lot of people that don't want to buy into what's going on. There's a lot of people that don't want to be forced and coerced into doing things, and that isn't like well established within the the normal narratives on it. But you're finding that when you tap that vein, that there's a lot there, and that there's a lot of emotional charge behind it. And I find that you could talk to how many people in the street and they'd really get it. They wouldn't get it generally if they're buying into the general consensus on what's going on. And it's big. Like you're hitting a big vein there, right? You're talking about people talking about their emotional outpouring to you and stuff. It's
remarkable.
And so that's not about jobs. That's about something bigger than just a job. That's about their livelihood and their sense of security in themselves and their lives. Mm-hmm. And all that's been kind of thrown up in an upheaval right now.
It's crazy. Like what I'm looking at, what I witnessed, like that period of time from late August to pretty much even still till now. I have a huge database of emails from across all of Canada, and what it is, it's a result of jobless jobs, but it's also a record of where this country was at for this period of time.
Yeah.
maybe sometime in the future I'll tap into that and pull out some excerpts to show people where we were at, because it's a record of where we were. And what I've concluded is it's the first time in our first world country where people aren't in control of the course of their lives.
Yeah. So the last person I had on as a guest on the podcast about 2 weeks ago now was a guy named John Foster. And he's got a master's degree in depth psychology. And we were talking about psychology in, general sense. And we were talking about how so often people don't really investigate their own motivations for things, and they don't really try to have that kind of self-awareness and just say, I want a peanut butter sandwich, but why? Well, why are you attracted to peanut butter? Why is there's these questions you can ask yourself about anything. And what I'm hearing from you though is, and I think this is so interesting and important too, because even you framed it up as a piece of Canadian history that's been sort of crystallized in your emails that you've been getting, is we're being led to a consensus on what's going on that doesn't feel right. And so even if a person is agreeing with it on the surface and going along with things and not questioning, maybe they're working in the hospital or they're working in a place that wears a mask all day and has the vaccine passport, and they know it's not quite right though. They feel something inside that's just, this isn't quite right, but they've never really done that work to investigate their own motivations, their own self in that way. And then you're kind of opening this door through this thing of saying you don't have to do this. And then people are just like, oh.
There's another option, the original option, the place where you can get a job and you don't have to answer that question.
Yeah.
That's what it was like before. So I'm not doing something new here.
Sure.
I'm doing something the same in a new time.
Yeah.
That's why it's so contrasting to the narrative.
Yeah. Yeah, and I like how you threw the punk in there too, because I'm an old school metal guy, and punk was definitely part of my upbringing too. So I appreciate the spirit of the punk.
Well, I remember the 90s. I think I remember the 90s. And there was this talk then. It was alternative music. Mainstream sucks.
Yeah.
We started to stop listening to radio rock and find that Pixies album. Find all this underground stuff. Mainstream sucks. Mainstream. That's it was spoken a lot.
Yeah.
So it was going against the mainstream narrative, and that's when I kind of I had my 90s flashback going, this is punk. We're punks right now.
Nice.
Everything else is mainstream. All those people running around trying to serve the master narrative, they're mainstream. We're not.
And it's funny you bring up the 90s too, because one of my favorite bands was Pantera back in the day, and they definitely on their live show would be like, it's us versus the mainstream kind of thing. That was definitely one of their frames. But this is what's happening today. I think the contrast, right? So you talk about you're just doing what existed before. You're not changing anything really, and yet it feels totally different now.
Yeah.
And I think that people don't really recognize how far we've come and how different. Yeah. And I think that has to do with that self-reflection thing of just sitting down and sort of saying, what actually is going on here? Not just keeping up with the herd as it panics and goes in different directions. Mm-hmm. But do you feel like, because you talked about photography for a moment there, and it sounds like you have a lot of different things you're actually capable of doing. And you talked about photography telling a story and stuff. Do you feel like maybe you'd want to try to take some of the more personal stories that are coming up through this and tell a story through them in some way?
Yeah, I mean, I thought about that, but I haven't been able to think about it too much. My days now are filled with just reacting to, responding to what needs to be done for jobs.
I should point this out. You're doing quite well with it, right? It's still going strong.
Oh, it's growing bigger.
Yeah.
Mandates are lifting, and we're breaking sales records. I had a lot of people telling me in recent months when the looming talk of mandates being lifted, they're like, you're gonna need to find a job, George, because soon you won't be needed. The mandates are lifting, and I just I don't know. I just wanted to see what would happen. There's another period of uncertainty. I'm used to that.
Sure. Well, what do you think's driving people to continue to want to use the service then? If it's no longer what it was a few months ago?
Well, I can answer that based on my theories from before and also what I'm witnessing today, currently. My theories before was that I really believed that we had grown and built trust and developed a strong brand loyalty.
Yeah.
Jabless Jobs has developed a brand loyalty that I mean, I didn't even have to spend a dime for it. Just the fact that we existed gave people hope. I've been told we were saving people's lives. There's no way of measuring that, but as of a few weeks back, we'd employed over 200 people. We've given hope to an immeasurable amount of people across Canada. I've received resumes from Puerto Rico, from Australia, from Texas, from New York, from England. I've even had one from Denmark. So we by this point, like, we'd expanded into the States. We hadn't even marketed anything into the States, and employers in the States started coming forward from states that had their mandates lifted and are posting on our job board on the United States JJUSA.
Okay.
So I just knew we had a strong brand loyalty. I was confident in that. However, I didn't know how things were going to play out. And I knew that a lot of people had lost trust. I'd spoken to them. I'd read their emails. There's a lot of people that are not going to go back to their jobs when they get offered the opportunity to. So I knew that we would still be somewhat relevant, maybe important to a market of a niche market, a smaller market, if that. I was confident in that, but I wasn't sure what else could happen. I wasn't, I was waiting for more to happen.
Well, and that's that. I think you hit on what I'm hearing as the main sort of thread for this is like integrity, the trust, the idea that you have an understanding of first principles that you apply to your business that isn't there in the large scale right now. That because so many businesses have just gone along with what they're being told to do without that, and that's concerning. And I think that again, this is something I've been thinking about a lot too. Is so many more people than you get led on to if you just sort of go along with the general consensus are concerned, but they're not really able to voice those concerns. They're not able to sort of bring them to the surface.
They are able to. They're just not taking those risks.
Sure. Okay, that's basically saying the same thing. Yeah.
Yeah, like they're allowed to.
Yeah.
They're not going to go to jail, and I mean, I don't want to knock somebody who's not speaking up because, this situation that we're all in is never black and white for anybody. It's variables. It's very layered for everyone.
For sure, and I'm not trying to call anybody who's not speaking up. That's not my point as much as that when you just know something's not right internally, it makes you uncomfortable. And then anything that can offer you some sense of comfort, you're going to gravitate towards that heavily, and it's going to become a point of projection to a certain degree. And that, I think, is explaining a lot of the popularity of the alternative media and podcasts, like the people that helped inspired me to do this podcast, because the people that are popular in that world have some integrity. It seems like they're honest people. It seems like they're trying to do honest things with the basis that we should all you'd think we all have, but has been sort of been pulled away in a lot of these official mandates and whatever else. So I could see how you could not only survive the time that you're doing, but you could become a job board that lasts for a long time, because as long as you can hold on to that integrity, people will be like, no, they're going to be there for me even if other rules change in my life in that sense.
Just from the last 2 weeks, seeing the mandates lift across the country, not all mandates, there's some federal ones, and I don't, to be honest, I don't really follow what mandates are lifted and what's not. I spend a lot of my time in my JJ bubble. In the recent months, me and Melissa stopped paying attention to news, and we just didn't want to get emotionally distracted and all the social media stuff we could be doing. So we just stay in our little bubble. We're not even very well connected to other groups in the movement. We're just staying in our lane, and that's caused us to sort of be in our little business bubble. And there's a few close friends we have, and other people we met in the movement that I stay in touch with. We've built some business mentors that are part of what we're doing, and I can get them on the phone anytime. But just seeing how things went in the last few weeks when mandates started lifting, I'm confident that we could be in business for a very long time.
Mm-hmm.
You know, and picking up from what I was saying before, being confident that we'd had developed a strong brand loyalty. What I'm seeing happen now is, I was correct. We do have a strong brand loyalty. People trust us. We earned that, and we're going to keep earning that. But we also have a situation that is unique in that there was a lot of employers before the mandates were lifted who were not in support of the mandates,
Mm-hmm.
and they weren't enforcing them, but they didn't feel comfortable
Yeah.
posting with us.
Yeah.
Now that the provincial mandates are lifting,
Yeah.
there's a lot more employers who are saying, "Hey, I'm not enforcing this anymore," and they're more comfortable in expressing it and being associated with a job board called Jabless Jobs. And I want to throw in here right now that we do have an anonymous option, but we have to vet the employer. So you know, an employer can post a job on our job board and not say who they are. We just want the job title. We want the location.
Okay.
If it's a small town that could give away the company, we want the region.
Okay.
But we want to know who they are. If we can't Google them, we're going to be calling them.
Yeah.
We're going to research. We vet those jobs heavily.
Yeah.
Because we want to protect the integrity of our job board. We want to protect the security of our job seekers.
Yeah.
And that really matters to me, the integrity of the job board. If something were to happen, I wouldn't be able to be comfortable with that. So you know, we vet them heavily, and we know who they are. When there's an anonymous job on our job board, I know exactly who that is. And Melissa's got her finger on that pulse a lot better. But I can find out anything I want about those companies, but I don't say it. We don't disclose any information that they're not comfortable with. Just the information that's on the job board is all anyone's going to get from me.
Yeah, well, that's actually one of those fundamental issues that are kind of underlying all of this, is this sense of what is privacy? What is your ability to be private in the public sphere? And but I'm wondering now too, like my industry, there was a lot of murmuring in the background about the vaccine mandates for people to participate in any sport, recreational activities, essentially. And now that the mandates are lifting, is how much of that is going to be like, oh, thank God that's over, or people are like, the relationship they're going to have going forward with this. And I think a lot of people are going to be like, thank God we can get rid of this and we don't have to do it anymore. And there's going to be an interesting conversations, I think, between a lot of employers and employees. And you talked about some employees maybe not even wanting to go back to their jobs.
No, they're not wanting to go back. There's some that are, but they feel they have to.
Yeah, that we've disrupted as a society. I say we, not specifically, but we've disrupted this dynamic of our social relationships on a professional level in a way that I've never seen. Like, it's never really happened.
No, I don't think so. I don't think this has happened before.
Not quite, not like this. I mean, war might disrupt it too, but it's a different kind of disruption. But going forward, I feel like the gravity will be towards the people that held their own and like yourself and said, no, we're not going to go along with this. I feel like there's going to be a gravity towards that inclination, because I think a lot of people, as I said, really don't feel good about it internally, even if they can't voice that. And I'm not saying I'm judging them that, but just the nature of that. Because I don't actually know anybody right now who would say to me, you know, the government was right about everything and everything we did was useful. So...
Well, there is some people who say that to me, some people I've known from years back, but they seem to have joined a new religion. They seem to have joined a cult. But there's also some people who, some months ago I would have assumed or viewed as being on the opposite side of the narrative from me, or on the other side of history from me. But in recent weeks, I've had some old friends reach out to me. They've seen me on the news, and I've been pleasantly surprised by their reaction and their stories. And one friend was telling me that he got fully vaxxed and went with the narrative but all the while he was making counterfeit passes for people, and he was giving people so. But he was secretive about it. But now he's in a position where he feels more comfortable talking about it, and because of me, what I'm doing, he wants me to know that. And I thought that was very great, and that was a great example of how it's never black and white. There's so many gray areas in everyone's perspective and experience over the last 6 months when the mandate started, that we can't just judge someone for a personal medical decision they made. A common thing I'm hearing though from all these people is they're giving me an excuse, and it's never one of medical concern. They made this choice to do what the government wanted them to do, but it wasn't because of a medical concern that they did it. They did it for their work, or they wanted to travel. I mean, we've all heard those excuses, but that's a little concerning to me. The fact that all these people did this not for medical reasons. And I want to say this on the record too. I don't need people to tell me why they did it. It's none of my business. And I'm not asking. When I talk to old friends and stuff, I don't care. I don't want to know. You don't have to tell me. If you want to tell me, I'll listen.
Sure.
But because I have jobless jobs and I run jobless jobs, people feel that they have to tell me where they're at. But it's not about that. It's about ethics.
Yes.
And I apply that to the company now. And this is a little controversial and a little polarizing with some of the people on our side of the history. On the jobless job side of history is when I say we don't ask, that's exactly what I mean. That is black and white. We do not ask, and that means it's I've only had 2 employers ask me this question, but it's an important question that I had to address and make a decision on. And they asked me if I could find them some staff that can prove that they're not vaccinated. And wait a second, it already says on my job board, non-discriminatory employment service. If I ask someone to prove to me that they're not vaxxed, isn't that discrimination? I asked myself that question. I concluded that it's yes. It's having to disclose your personal medical choices to an employer. And that's discrimination, and I'm not okay with that. So we don't do that.
I'm just a little curious about why an employer would actually stipulate they want somebody who's unvaccinated. I don't get why that would be.
Well, there might be some truth behind it. I've never dug into it, and I don't really want to. It's above my pay grade. But there's this spike protein thing people keep talking about and shedding, and I don't want to even go there.
So, but they're concerned about that somehow.
I think that's what it is. And I've had a couple people, but I've been in conversation with friends and people I know about that. They always go, it's because of shedding. And I don't know enough about that or care to learn about it. If it's a medical thing, then that's fair. However, I'm not doing it, and I hope that Jobless Jobs is the catalyst towards the answer of solving that problem, because we have to learn to live together.
Well, that's absolutely 100% agree, 100%. And I totally take your point that discrimination either way is a problem. And that actually is at the core of my problem with it too, is, again, first principles. I don't want to discriminate against people, period. I don't care whether that discrimination fits into my ideology or not. That's not the point. And that's actually one of the biggest concerns I've always had about this whole thing, was labeling any group of people as less than equal to everyone else is insanely dangerous based on human history, based on human behavior, especially if the majority of people aren't, as I said, aren't self-aware enough to really know why they're being motivated to do things, because that always leads to one group pushes the other one down in some horrific way, or it doesn't always start that way, but it ends up there. But anyways, so I agree with that 100%. I think that, again, the attraction to what you're doing, which is really interesting to me, and I was having a conversation, so I could bring it back to this a little bit, with a person I know who still doesn't realize that there really is kind of like alternative to the mainstream media sources of information, and that the podcast world is a big world, and they're still not quite aware of that. And yet the audience for these alternative viewpoints is huge. It's absolutely huge, and it's a serious chunk of the population that is just not given a voice. And so and you tapped into this, right? In this sense, you're becoming.
Well, I was one of them.
One of them, and in a way that, and I actually wouldn't mind talking about this, but in a way that has such key relevance, because to participate in society, you have to have a job. Essentially, you have to have some way to survive. And like, it'd be one thing if they said like you couldn't go visit the old folks home if you're not vaccinated. That sucks, and there's something wrong with that, I think, on some levels. But it's like, well, the rationale is limited to one little specific part of society, and you can fight about it within the specifics of that. But like, you can't have a job. Wait, what? Like that sets you way back and says this is way more than just a minor inconvenience. This is serious infringement on people's ability to survive.
Well, and then the social pressure too, like the public humiliation that I've heard about, that's going on. It's just shocking. And if you look back on history, like every civil war started by, division within the country, and, even division within the family. And then we're witnessing that happen with this narrative, with this topic. And I don't want to contribute to that. I'm not going to allow jobless jobs to, I don't want to feel that guilt in the future. I don't want to allow jobless jobs to contribute to a two-tiered society. That's why it's not about which medical choice you made.
Yeah.
It's about ethics.
Yeah.
Do you support an employer asking you private medical information or not? That's the ethics. I feel it's more ethical to not. I feel that's ethically correct to not have to disclose your private medical information.
Yeah.
So I'm not going to allow for it on either end of the narrative. I'm not going to be the other extreme. The name we have slightly contradicts that. I say slightly because I could change the name to no medical information job. Because Jabless means the same. Yeah. However, it confuses people a little because they seem to think that, and rightfully so, that we're only serving the unvaccinated. And for all I know, we only have been. But I'm not limiting it to them because I'm not asking. So it's about ethics. It's not about medical choices. If a fully vaccinated person wants to browse our job board to find a job that ethically suits them, I have no problem with that. Yeah. And I wish them all the best. I'm glad they're on the same side of history as me.
Well, that's why you're going to succeed with this, I think, because mentality is a stepwise process. Like intellectual growth is a stepwise process. And if you're still stuck in the tribalistic thinking of like, they're bad and I'm right on either side of that coin, you're not actually evolved enough to go forward into a future where we can connect and work together.
Yeah, there's no us and them. We have to stop this.
Yeah, I agree. No, there's a guy named Ken Wilber. He's a philosopher kind of guy, and he was the first person that kind of explained this to me in a way I could understand. But like, you think about a little child and the way they look at the world, everything that exists is essentially their family, their mom and dad, especially their mom when they're really little, and then it expands more and more and more. And at some point, it goes beyond the immediate family, and then you get the tribe and you get the group. But at that point, people sometimes often get stuck because the thing that's outside of that tribe, another group of people, can be labeled as the enemy, and then you get into the tribal
strangers.
Yeah, and we have this in modern politics, which is bizarre in a way because you'd think that we'd have evolved our politics beyond childish tribalistic behavior, but we haven't. That itself is the danger, is to make that too strongly, the only way to look at it, instead of saying, well, what's the connection? You're another human being. That's a good connection. You're an honest human being. I don't believe that you're going to steal from me. Well, great. We can have a relationship that we have a business together. And it doesn't matter to me what you do in your personal life. That's your business. And as long as it's legal and with other consenting adults, you can do whatever you want, essentially. And that's always been my view on it. But I have principles that come before my own personal maybe want of the situation, my own personal, the ease of the situation isn't as important to me as doing what's right in that sense. And I think I think it's really good that you brought up though this other point, that it's hard to manage that when you have a job that has committed you to expectations that you may not agree with, but your family relies on that income. I think that's important to remember. Have compassion for people in that space.
I mean, I know what I do in the shoes I'm standing in now, but if I had a family full of kids and one of them's crying to play hockey, I don't know what I would do.
Yeah, absolutely.
You know, so I can't judge them, and they're welcome in our network. They're welcome with us. Like they're not excluded from having the opportunity to seek employment and not having to answer that question. I wanna open the door to more of Canada being able to find employment without having to answer that question.
Yeah.
Not because of any other reason other than because that's normal, that's right, that's correct.
Yeah.
That's it, you know.
Yeah.
So I mean, I made this statement on Laura Lynn Live a few weeks back. She's great. I don't know if you've heard of her. She's got her own show, and the following days I started getting emails about it. There's some pretty extreme people on our side of history, and that's cool. And, you know, on one hand, I'm sorry I can't please everybody, but on the other hand, it gets people talking, and really, if they're getting pissed off that I'm not limiting it only to the unjabbed, then let them talk. It's just more publicity for me. I mean, like, just go for it, you know. It's really like, there's no employer who's gonna want to post under the name of Jabless Jobs if they're faking it.
Yeah.
I know, and we vet them and stuff, and we're also not responsible for any employer's future decisions.
Sure.
I don't want to have to turn to an employer at any time and say, you have to do what I say. Here's a contract, and this says that you're never gonna make this choice.
Yeah.
I'm not doing that.
Yeah.
And all these questions have come across my desk. I've had to answer them.
Yeah.
And I'm just not gonna do that. I don't want to put a livelihood of an employer on some contract in the future. If they have to make some choice that I don't agree with, that's none of my business.
Yeah.
And we're in a new open market now where you not only can go and get a job with a company that could fold and go under, which was the case before, but you could go and get a job with a company that is likely may or may not want to impose a new restriction on you.
Yeah.
That's something that we have to accept as a new part of our lives.
Yeah.
So let's just consider it as part of the open market. This is a new, variable to capitalism. That's it. And if you get a job through an employer on the Jabless Jobs job board, you're less likely to encounter that. Yeah. But I ain't gonna promise it. Yeah. Because I don't feel it's right for me to enforce an employer to make a choice in the future that I have nothing to do with.
I wouldn't mind picking up on this idea of moving forward in the future where we get along with each other. Because so for my own situation.
How do we do that?
Yeah, how do we do that? Well, I think immediately of the fact that I have family members who are both sides of the choice. Not necessarily that they're particularly politically driven in that sense, but they've made personal choices to get a jab or not to get the jab. And I love them. They're my family members. I don't have any desire to sort of diminish my connection to my family because of a personal medical choice, and any more than I would be like, I don't love my aunt because she got a flu shot, right? That's ridiculous. It's so crazy that is even something that has to be sort of wrestled with. But I think in the end, it's simple, but it's not easy maybe for some people who get caught up in being very tribalistically sort of polarized in this sense. But really, just another person is another person. Why would you, you're not concerned about whether they eat healthy food necessarily. You're not gonna, if you meet them on the street, that's not your,
but you want your friends to be healthy, you want your friends to be well, you want your family to be well.
Yeah, but you would only encourage that. You're not going to say to them, if you ate a cheeseburger, I'm not going to be your friend, right?
Yeah, that's not, I think that's a bit of a stretch of an analogy, but it's a good one because it can take us to start stepping towards the understanding.
Yeah, thinking at least about what this really means and what this really entails. And I think the part of the bizarre and challenging part of the last 2 years was the extreme social isolation that has been sort of thrust on everyone. Like, you're really not allowed to interact with a lot more other people in society. That was one of the big rules, essentially.
Yeah.
And that's a really strange thing to do to a social species, especially a social species like us. Like, I know people that their lives revolved around going to dance parties, right? Like,
Yeah.
and it's like suddenly you just can't do that at all. And I'm sure there was some underground ones, but like, on a large scale. So the reconnection is going to be something that's going to maybe feel trepidatious, but I think it's going to also be like a tidal wave of emotional sort of outpouring when people really start to open up again and reconnect with each other.
Mm-hmm.
And how do you facilitate that has been something I was thinking about, because in my job, I definitely have people in all kinds of different places in the political and social sphere. And the one thing I've noticed is that if you sort of remain calm and open up the space to them to relax a little bit, then you can start to remember that, hey, everybody likes each other. Hey, everybody wants to get along together. It's when the tension is held onto in those social situations that you start getting into the barking at each other problem. And so reminding people to be calm and come from a centered place and come from a place where you're like, okay, I don't need to get upset about a person disagreeing with me. I can just sort of relax. That seems to be the essence of it.
I think the mistake is expecting anyone to change their mind during a conversation. That is such a huge 180 to take for somebody. Like, that is just a miraculous experience for someone who's really strong in one narrative, strong in one direction. To expect them to change their mind during a conversation, or an interaction, or a phone call, or a social media exchange, that's not going to happen. Mm-hmm. The expectation to try and change their mind is just barking up the wrong tree. There is a slow process that's needed for someone to change their life. I mean, it takes 2 weeks or so to change your taste buds palate. It takes
that's a good one.
It takes a long time for me to warm up to a brand new looking jacket. I will never wear neon. There's a lot of ways to come across this, but to approach this topic, but it's so much more embedded than that. Like, you cannot change someone's mind in a conversation, and you shouldn't try. Mm-hmm. It's a mistake, and it's very tempting, and it's very encouraging to want to try, and it's important to have open debate. But if you're trying to change someone's mind, you and get them to agree with you on the spot, it's hopeless.
Yeah.
Don't even try.
Yeah.
And I want to go back a little while. Like, I became an adult in the mid-90s. I remember life before 9/11. I remember life before the internet. And I remember life around the time of George W. Bush and 9/11 and the Iraq War starting in 2003. Yeah. That's when we started to see an evolution. Like at the end of the 90s, going into 9/11, when that happened, that was when the world's greatest party ended. I joke with younger people saying you missed it. The world's greatest party started in 1964 and it ended on 9/11.
Interesting. Okay.
I'm sorry. I can tell you all about it. I caught the end of it. I was there. It was a good time. But now I started to watch the evolution go. I wasn't calling this an evolution at the time, but I in hindsight I could see it. Mm-hmm. The Iraq War happened, and people started to think about race and culture. Mm-hmm. There was the Islamophobe term came up for the first time. Mm-hmm. Then that opened up the doorway for the feminist movement and the gay rights movement to have more elbow space and get a little more organized. No one was looking at them so much anymore, and then they built ground, and they started building, and they started influencing more people in power, more people in politics, and more power to them. I have no problem with that. Eventually, around that time too, in the late 90s and early 2000s, I was well known in my circles. I had some good times. I could get you into that party that you wanted to go to. And I know, like, and I went through some challenges with the loss of my dad, which I don't want to get too much into, but when I was going through a hard time, there was, let me back up a little bit, when the times were good, everyone knew me and wanted to know me and wanted to be my friends. I felt like I had all these wonderful people and all this love and everything from all these people. But when times got harder, I noticed that those same people were just socially driven, and they weren't there for me. They weren't really my friends. They were just people that wanted a seat at the table. They wanted to get into that party. And I was in newspapers a lot in the early 2000s with my photography. So they wanted to get their band in the paper. They wanted that attention. I know, with my name being attached to, publications, news publications, and me having my camera around my shoulder, they would change. I would watch them change in front of me to try and get, for me to get them that social acclamation, that social, opportunity, that what we now call that wonderful selfie, which didn't exist then, but. These same people, and that caused me to start looking at what people are more socially driven and what people are not. And I paid attention to that from that time on, even more so than I did at any other period of my life. What is it that, who are these people who are driven by how they stand socially, and who are the people who are driven by what they believe in, what's in their hearts, and what's taking them in their own direction, their own path, as opposed to being a little more tribal. The tribal people, for lack of a better term, seem to, enjoy each other's, statements on politics. They weren't reading politics. They weren't reading into it. They weren't following the news. They were just repeating what their friends said. If that so-and-so person has a law degree, well, then they must know, and they party the same way I do. So they go to the same, social club as me. So their opinion is going to be okay for me to repeat to my friends, because it's not going to get me into any social trouble. And what I wasn't realizing at the time is that was the evolution. That was the start of an era that eventually grew into what we now look back on as the woke left. I think the woke left era is over. What we have now is the woke left have gone a little further into what we can now call, instead of identity politics and woke leftism, what we got now is something called biopolitics. And I hope that's a new phrase that sticks, because I've only heard it from one other person.
Okay.
And I want to put it out there because I think it's very important to understand where we're at right now. Is we're in a time of woke left has been blurry. I mean, I even heard of BLM people in support of something that I would do, that I'm doing. There's no necessarily woke left anymore that doesn't really dictate if they're going to take the vaccine or not. What we have now is a biopolitics era, where your choice on whether or not you're going to take the vaccine is going to dictate who you vote for. And that's going to eventually send you into a camp, a political camp. And that camp is not based on anything democratic other than your choice to take a medical procedure or not. That is biopolitics.
Okay, so bio is like biological politics.
Yeah, and that's the best way I can understand it. And I don't have a degree in bioethics, but I wish there was someone in the room that does, because I want to hear what they have to say about it, whatever side of the narrative they're on, because this is a much bigger topic than choosing a medical decision. When we have biopolitics going on, and I wonder if we're going to look back on this era and give it that name.
Yeah.
Because it's a way of understanding the division.
Well, I mean, just in the terms of ethics, there's no way you can coerce somebody into doing something and call it ethical, in terms of what ethics are supposed to mean. That's just not. But I think that I tend to think of it more like the split between the different camps that is developing, that the vaccines are one of the elements that has created a larger division, and there's definitely the fanatical on one side and fanatical on the other side. But I don't know if it's the vaccine is the sole determining factor. I think it's just one of a number of factors that.
Well, I think I'm not certain, but from what I've seen over the last 25 years or so, the way people react socially, I think that the driving factor towards any life decision for most people is where they will stand socially.
I agree with that. And I think there's like almost like a package of things that go along with certain ideologies, and so you get a little array of different things you have to sort of accept. But that tribal thinking though is fundamentally true. 100%, I agree with that. And I think about this a lot from terms of my industry too, because we deal with a lot of the idea of dealing with threats, situational awareness, and all this kind of thing. Is we really are a species that was evolved out of prey items, right? We weren't really a predator species. We developed some predatory behaviors for sure, but I mean, really, we're eaten by other things. And so that social desire to go along with the group is born out of that desire not to stand out and get eaten by a predator.
Yeah, he's like kicked out of your tribe and be alone. Yeah.
Well, and literally get eaten too, because if you're not protected by the tribe and a social animal, you're dead. You're not going to make it.
Yeah.
And so, just as a quick example, like there's studies done where scientists are trying to track zebras. Zebras have a bizarre camouflage because a zebra by itself gets picked out really easily against the background of the situation. But in a herd, the stripes are really hard to pick out individual zebras. And so the scientists are having trouble tracking individual zebras to learn about their lives, right? So they put a red stripe on it, and that red stripe was visually available to the lions, and so the lions could pick that zebra out, and immediately they always got taken. And so this is why people don't want to stand out from the herd. Is it makes you noticeable, right?
Yeah, and I very much believe that there's some primitive, reaction, some primitive drive to respond in that way. I can really understand that there's that primitive need to fit in and be a part of the tribe, and I accept that, and I think we've all, had parts of our lives or, departments of our daily lives where we comply to that. We're social creatures. That's very natural. But what I'm witnessing now is two things, two types of people. A lot of the people who are vocal in the narrative have experience, vocal against the mainstream narrative, have an experience or a series of experiences in their lives before COVID where they were outcast socially, either by choice or by accident, or by doing what's right and being forced to hold their ground and either being canceled or losing their friends or forced into a divorce or something. There's a lot of people who were the social outcasts who are very much comfortable with the social uncertainty of the time we're in. And I think that, I don't know if outcast is the right word, but I think I fit into that a little bit, or maybe a lot, because I realized in the early 2000s when I watched people coming to me to get into the party, and then when life got difficult, they were gone. And then when later on, when life got good again, they were back. And they were we always loved you, George. But I know now I'm suspicious. And so that's when I started to drift away. I made my tribe a lot smaller. And it took a while. It's a big step to take, especially in your 20s and stuff, but it took a long time, and it wasn't as simple as I make it out to be. But I started making my tribe a lot smaller and staying in touch with less people, and realizing that we only have a few real good friends in life. The rest are just people we know. We know them better than others. But when people are so driven socially, it's very hard to know what their intent is. And I'm glad I went through that process, because then when this COVID stuff happened, I didn't really feel about any concern about any social ridicule or public humiliation. I had been through that. that.
Yeah.
You know, it's not that bad. It's actually a compliment if you believe in what you're doing. So I was very much, I didn't really even give it a second thought that I would have any, I wasn't really concerned with whatever backlash I might get.
Yeah, it's funny. Again, I keep thinking about how you brought up the reference to punk, right?
Yeah, the alternative.
Yeah, and like, cause I wasn't just into like Pantera metal, but I got into like extreme death metal, and I used to play in a death metal band, and like this was like a big part of my life. And try to explain to some person who's never heard of extreme death metal what it is, right? And like, why do you like that? That doesn't sound like a thing anybody would like. And so I think you're right. It gave me a sense of being comfortable on the outside of the group.
Yeah.
And then because of that, it's more comfortable for me to say, I don't like what's going on over there. I don't really want to take on that thing I'm supposed to take on necessarily. I'm more comfortable resisting.
I'm not going to pretend to like your music.
Yeah.
Just because everyone's listening to that song, I still think it sucks.
Yeah, and you get more comfortable doing that.
No, exactly.
Yeah. No, and I think it also ties into this theme that we've sort of touched on. That's a big part of this is if you're not reflecting on yourself or figuring out who you are and what your motivations are, you're more likely to go with the group because it's easier and you don't have to have any sort of contemplation. But you start to think about who you are and what your relationship to the group is, you stand out. Well, you become more of an individual then too.
Yeah.
You can actually become who you could really be. And that means you're not going to do what the group necessarily does. And I think that that's actually the story of humanity. Because I always think back to like the primitive human being, right? And what's the first human being to put together a hunting strategy in a real conceptual way? Like that would have happened at one point. Well, that person would be unique. They wouldn't be like the rest of the group. And that inspiration that comes up, that's not for everybody. That's the one person who has that inspiration. You had an interesting inspiration for your job, Jabless jobs, right? Where did that come from? Nobody else did it. You did it. And so, was it because you were able to create yourself as more an individual person throughout your life in certain ways that gave you the sense that you're going to stand alone and push against the narrative? Like, I'm really curious about that with people. And I bring it up with the nurses I've had on that have quit their jobs, and I've talked to some politicians. And how does a person get to that point where they're willing to stand up and say, no, I'm going to do my own thing, even if it's not the easiest choice to make?
Well, that is such a... again, it's never black and white. Everyone's got their own, situations to bring them to that. I wish I could dissect that more. I can only look at myself specifically, but also myself and my reaction to, social circles over the years. I was perfectly fine with missing that party, but I was also, fine going there too. I sure want that memory, but I don't need to build my life around it. But so I was good around people. I'm great. I think I am at least good in social circles, but I'm also very comfortable alone. And I don't know if that was a developmental thing or if that was an innate thing I was born with in my personality. But I that always felt like a gift. To go away and be alone has been my life's secret weapon. As I get older, it's grown into a bit of a double-edged sword, but we don't have to go into that. But it's always been something I had. It's been that tool I had in my pocket to reset and reflect.
Yeah.
And understand where I was doing before and what I want to do next. It was, and I think it's going to be a part of my life forever. But what is it that makes us do it? I look at, I've been, someone's going to laugh when I say this, but I've been noticing the women of the movement a lot. Like I almost said I look at women a lot.
Be careful.
Naturally. But the loudest voices in this movement have been women. I haven't measured it, I haven't counted or done a real census on it, but I constantly see women coming forward and speaking out against the narrative, speaking their truth. And it's inspiring, and I wonder where all the men are. And one common denominator these women have is their mothers. And I mean, granted, there's the woman I mentioned before who I met who organized the Save Small Business Rally. I don't believe she has any kids. She's not a mom. She's just not afraid to be out on her own with the
Sure.
narrative. So it's not all of them, but so we got two kinds of people in this movement: is those who are comfortable being or have experience as outcasts, and those that are moms.
Interesting.
So they have a reason to think outside the box, and or they were already wired to think outside the box.
Yeah.
And all of it comes down to willingness to take the risk socially, and women are a lot more prone to want to be part of the tribe than men are. I'm not a psychologist. I won't try and dissect that much more than that, but women are a lot more prone to be a part of the fashion, and they're a lot more prone to want to have a community, want to be social, want to interact with people more often. So to see women coming forward and taking the lead in this movement, it really got my attention. And every week, every month, I see a new woman coming forward and taking the lead on a new idea and on a new part of this. Yeah. And it's something that we need to really recognize. Okay. Because there's something to be measured in there.
Yeah. Well, I've often jokingly said that society is the result of women. Yeah. Because men would just want to kill things and eat them raw. They never evolve at all, right? But yeah, I'd never would have framed it that way. I definitely agree with the outcast thing. If you're an outcast already, it's easy to continue to be an outcast, and you have a sense of how to manage that. But yeah, that's really an interesting observation. That you see a lot of mothers, especially as or even if they're not specifically a mother, the spirit of the mother kind of coming through them in that way. Yeah. Yeah. Well, I get it because it's care. And I mean, I did a podcast just where I was talking about, to me, one of the key issues is if you're really compassionate, you're not judgmental. And there's that balance is really important to me. And I see that as being something that you definitely develop when you're little from your mother, largely, is your mother's infinitely compassionate to the infant when it's born, right? That's her role. And then of course hopefully that father is too, and it sustains itself. But yeah, that is a point of hope, I would think, in a way, because if women and mothers are behind the movement, it's going to have an effect. It's going to work more than if it was just a bunch of angry men.
Yeah, and fortunately there are those mothers, they have kids, and their kids are gonna have the memory of their mother taking the lead on the movement, and to empower them and give them some sort of to embolden them later in life. Those kids are gonna be emboldened by the actions of their moms.
So you sort of half mentioned it, but I mean I don't know if we can pull much out of this, but do you feel like there's a lack of leadership from men in general in all this?
I do, yeah. Huh. And I'm not going to toot my own horn here because I stand up to pee, but I think that it's traditionally, those of us who stand up to pee have been the ones that stand up for freedom too. Yeah. But we're in a new time now, and I think, it's not just the motherhood that's been the women, but it's also information. I believe, going back into, the primitive years of our existence, information has always been a woman's currency. Now a woman can obviously be educated in our Western world and lead a life of her choice. That there's still a lot of parts of the world that don't have that, and there's a large part of history where women didn't have that either. And so they couldn't earn for themselves. Their currency was information. Their safety net was knowing where to go and where not to go, and who could make a good provider. And seeing examples in men while they're growing up as to who is a good provider, what are the good character traits. What are the things that a man says that makes him honorable? And that is wired deeply into women. I truly believe that. And over the last 10 years, 15 years, I don't know how long it's been since smartphones came out, I've just been seeing nothing but women doing nothing but looking in their phones. And I thought they were just being social creatures. But in hindsight now, because of COVID, I'm like, they were absorbing information.
Interesting.
They were building up their currency bank, right? They were growing that information currency this whole time. And I thought they were just, being social. And maybe more of them, not many of them are.
A little bit of both.
But they know that now we got this, we're in this information battle. And coincidentally, the currency of women is what the battle is over. And that's, pardon me, I'll rephrase that. The currency of women is what this battle is about.
You mean information?
Information.
Yeah.
Women, currency being
I get what you mean. I see what you mean.
Currency for women.
Yeah.
And I truly believe they're wired for it.
Yeah. Well, if you think about the primitive setting, the gossip amongst the tribe would tell you what's going on. And it was basically the men where the job was to go and confront the lion if it came into the group. That was largely your role, is to stand there and put yourself against the danger. But who would have told you to do that? Probably a woman.
So, I think a great woman is one who will challenge the man in her life. Not in a nagging sort of way, but in a way to bring out the best in him.
Yeah.
A way for him to find out what he's made of.
Yeah.
I think a man's role is to take the lead when he has to and when he should, and take the risk to be the provider. And a woman is supposed to encourage that and make her man and help make her man stronger.
Well, okay, so that's interesting, because that's the nucleus of the nuclear family, right? That's the core of the human structure, really. Now, you said that there was a bit of a lack, you feel, of leadership from men in terms of the pushback against the COVID thing. But there's a bigger issue that ties into is, I grew up, and the men in my family, especially in the generation beyond my dad, were all like World War II vets and hardcore guys. And, there was definitely some problems with that, but they definitely stood up and held their ground and knew what freedom was and cared about their country and in this way that I just don't see anymore. And so, what's happened to men in that sense? What's happened in the last 30 years to the idea of masculinity is doesn't seem good to me. It doesn't seem like it's helping.
I mean, I've heard all the theories. Too much estrogen in the drinking water. Good times make weak men.
Yeah.
That's all fair. But I think it comes down to, social acceptance for the most part. The goal of a human in our Western world now is to be accepted socially and be able to get a selfie in Hawaii or Mexico every winter, and you don't have to work too hard to get that. And we've forgot about what it means to have to, take your personality and your social risk to a next level. And I think this is it's a terrible time with everyone losing their jobs and mistrust in the media and the government and all this corruption being exposed. But what a wonderful time to be alive and rediscover this stuff. And I've been at a great vantage point of watching it, because as it gets more intense, my business gets better. So I can comfortably watch it all from the helm of Jabless Jobs and take notes, file away that email, and try to piece it together as we go. But I think what we're seeing now is men having to realize their role again.
Yeah. Well, I like, and even if we just say that humanity in general is just this remembering, this reconnecting to what has been sort of blurred and just taken at a distance. And I like how you sort of phrased it as a positive, because when you finish a run and you sit down and have a nice glass of water, that water can taste amazing because you had that experience that brought you to that. And so, yeah, I think there's a lot of hope within the framework of that. And I like the idea that you put all along here that your aim is to be a structure as a company to not discriminate and not allow yourself to get pulled into discriminating for either side of the coin.
Yeah.
And then we bring that into that idea, like to connect it to what we're talking about with remembering the values that maybe have been lost as a positive. And it's like, that's actually a pretty good direction to go and continue to go, hopefully, into the future. Because, as I said before we started recording, is I like to try to make sure at the podcast near the end of the interview, there's some concepts of solution thinking and in a direction that works in that way. And this is it right there. That's the perfect nutshell of the whole thing. Have integrity with your business, and that means to not choose sides in terms of these political things, but just help everybody that wants to be helped and is willing to take on the responsibility of self-responsibility. And then to remember, I would say even joyously, the values that have been sort of pushed down that have great value for us still. And that's a good way to look at the future, I would think.
You know, I think that we have to have open conversations. We have to accept that we're not going to hear people agree with us in the midst of a conversation. We have to start thinking about not how to change someone's mind, but how to plant that seed of thought so they can go away and think about it on their own. And what's the most gentle, polite way to do that, and tactical way to do that as well. Not to deceive anybody, but to get your point into their mind. And I think it's through a series of questions and perhaps a reasonable amount of uncomfortable questioning if you can, if you can balance that well enough.
Yeah.
But that's a one-on-one interaction, people to people. But there's a bigger version of that as well. I started hearing about started paying attention more to the lobbyists in Washington, in Washington D.C. The fact that mainstream media is getting government money. Here's a little life hack, and I'm surprised at how many people don't know this. I thought it was obvious. But when you're watching the mainstream news, and you might know this, I don't mean to say this directly to you, but just in general, like if you're watching the mainstream news, if you're watching the news at night, the 6 o'clock or 10 o'clock news, what you got to do is you got to pay attention to what the commercials are, what companies are advertising between the segments of the news, because we're in a time now where that news program is serving their agenda.
Right. Yeah.
And that existed a long time ago. That existed long before COVID.
Yeah.
And what people aren't realizing is that those news, and I hate it when we call them organizations, they're not, they're companies, they're for profit. They are making money for profit. Newspapers have shareholders. They have to release quarterly earnings. They are not an organization. They are not owned by the people. They're owned by their shareholders, and there's a board of directors that are in charge of making those profits every quarter. And when they're making profits, everyone's happy and they're doing their job, and they have to do that job. It is their job. They have to do it. Yeah. What we have to start doing is recognize this as unethical capitalism. I'm a supporter of capitalism. But when certain industries like news and and jobs like politics can be legally influenced by a dollar, then we're entering into an unethical period, and we're long past that point now.
Yes.
So what we got to do is we got to recognize that the news being told us, the mainstream news is capitalism. It's a company, and the same goes with someone who is working in politics. When you look at someone's political career and they were poor when they started and they stayed in politics their whole life, and they're a rich person towards the end of their life, we got to raise a red flag to that. You shouldn't get rich as a politician. You should be able to serve the people and be able to be comfortable in life. But if you started off your life making a middle class wage as a politician, and you stayed a politician your whole life and you're in your 60s or 70s, and now you're a multi-millionaire going on billionaire, why aren't we raising the red flag at that? That's lobbyists. That's lobbyists filling their pockets to get their agenda done. The same thing happens with the commercials between the news. The same thing happens with lobbyists in politics. So there's that conversation that needs to be had as well. That's when we got to just turn to those people and say, you've betrayed us.
Yeah.
You've been bought.
Yes.
And that needs to be understood by more people.
Yeah, and it's interesting, I think, because we've had such a blatant corruption of, you know, who's driving what in the politics and the media for so long that people have just become numb to it.
Yeah, it's normalized.
It's normalized,
yeah.
And it's like, that's going to come to a head though, because at some point that interest, which is not for the betterment of society in general, is going to come up against society. It's going to
turn around at some point.
Yeah.
I mean, it's great when those guns are pointing away to protect you, but if they turn around and start pointing at you, it's a different feeling altogether. You know, we got to just open up the conversation to the micro and the macro. You know,
Yeah.
The one-on-one and the big picture too.
And you said something else that I think is really important about this, and I think it ties into, again, a big overarching theme here is, if you have a conversation with someone who has disagreement with you about some of these issues, and you can have a decent conversation, you both learn, you both grow, it's better for everybody. You're not going to change their mind, you know, in a single conversation. That's not a reasonable expectation. But the thing that allows that conversation to exist is trust, that you're talking to a person who respects you, even if they disagree with you. Right? That's huge, because right now, so many people, when they pick the side, it's like they don't give the other side the valuation of them as a human being, and that ruins the ability to build that bridge of trust across, right?
Yeah.
And that's, so I think you're exactly right, that's we need the uncomfortable conversations, but we need them to be trusting in that sense.
So what I've witnessed in the last 25 years is, you know, social standing evolved into woke left. Woke left evolved into identity politics. Identity politics evolved into biopolitics. And it's come down to the nuclear family being split at the dinner table. You can't come here because you didn't make the same biological decision as me. You can't come to your mother's birthday party.
Yeah.
You know, you can't do Christmas with us.
Yeah.
And when you start to split the kitchen table, every single civil war in history has had that same occurrence.
Yeah.
The topic at hand that drove that country into a civil war was at the kitchen table.
Yeah, that's a really good point. And what is at the heart of what concerned me the most about all of this is that splitting, in that, you know, you're over there and I'm over here, and you know, start yelling at each other. And you know, again, my industry being martial arts, I definitely have a sense of how violence occurs and all this. And it's like, no, the whole, one of the big lessons you teach people is you take the long way home to avoid any potential conflicts. You don't want physical conflicts. And this is how they get set up. And you go, oh, I don't want to do that. I don't want to go down that path. But then people aren't self-aware. They aren't thinking about the process and where things go. And then they just trust, and we get into these conflicts. But again, I think you've hit the nail on the head on so many important positive elements in terms of how we can go forward. And you know, what's interesting too is all of them are just simply basically a choice about how you respond to the situation and what you do within that framework. It isn't that this guarantees it's going to be a healthy, happy, positive future, but it's what at least gives it the best possibility. And then you can also start to avoid the things that really sort of shut down that process. And so that's really good. I do like, I was saying this to another person the other day about another guy, the guy that's walking across Canada.
Oh yeah, I heard about him marching to Ottawa.
Yeah. And it's like, yes, there's inspiration coming in through people to do things that are helping somewhat in the right direction, and it's there. You don't have to feel like there's no hope, there's nothing. There's these things like what you're doing, what he's doing, that's actually moving forward in a positive way. Because this goes all the way back to the kind of the beginning of the podcast in a way, is your very interesting journey to develop Jabless Jobs had you at a moment in time feeling uncertain about your future because of the situation you're in with the company you're working for and all this stuff, and that breeds in people a sense of feeling isolated and feeling alone. And where you're not alone, there's a lot of people that are concerned and have frustrations and have issues, and that's a way of connecting. And then through that connection you can build the bridge, you can trust each other, you can have hard conversations if you need to, and we can actually start to move forward in a way that to me is a much better future. And I think that that's probably one of the most positive things that I hope the podcast helps people know, is that they're not alone if they have these concerns, if they want a different way of going about things, and that there's people like yourself and that are trying to make that possible and trying to actually create that in the world.
Yeah, I mean, I haven't been trying. I mean, let's remember, I was just trying to get a job. It exploded.
Yeah.
And we've had some, exceptional growth spurts since the very beginning. But I didn't sit back and say, here's a company idea. I'm gonna become a CEO, and I'm gonna incorporate this idea, and I'm gonna form this brand, and I didn't have it all written out. And then and this is me on my journey to executing something pre-planned. I reacted to a circumstance, and that developed a greater circumstance, and I continued to react to that as well. So there's a constant circumstance that I'm constantly reacting to, and that's been the evolution of Jabless Jobs.
Yeah.
That's been how we've gotten to 7 months later now.
Sure, and the fact the company's being successful is great as one thing, but the connection to the idea that there's a community of people, that you're not alone in your frustrations.
Yeah.
This is such an important message, I think, in that. Although, I know that there's been big rallies and big protests and stuff, but it's funny how people can feel isolated and alone no matter what. Like that.
Yeah, but to be seen at one of these rallies is potentially a social risk for a lot of people.
Right.
To be a business owner and all your customers are 100% with the narrative and very quick to put their mask on before they come in. If you see that, and then you want to go to a rally and be seen and risk being seen at the rally.
Mm-hmm.
So there's a lot of people who feel the same way as us, who don't go to these rallies. They can't. You see them driving by honking.
Yeah.
Those are the people where you hear their horn honking. For the last year, every single rally I've been to, there's been that person just in that car that just by themselves honking and waving and smiling. Well, they're not at the rally, but they're with us.
Yeah.
And we're marching for them, and we'll never know their name.
Yeah.
But there is a lot more people out there. And I think what Jabless Jobs has done, one of the things Jabless Jobs has done is given those people a sense of hope, because they're at home and learning about what's happening on the internet. And then they come across this website that provides jobs for people without asking medical information. And they're like, hey, I understand that.
Yeah.
That's what it used to be like.
Yeah. Yeah.
That's what I want.
Yeah.
And we're going to continue doing that. It's free to apply for a job, and it'll always be free. We only charge the employers to post on our job board. That's it. Like you can apply for a job for nothing. All you need is a resume. Mm-hmm. We're gonna do our best and continue to protect the integrity of the job board. We're gonna make sure we don't allow multi-level marketing on there. Mm-hmm. We make sure that every company on there is a real company, and if we can't Google them, then we're talking to them on the phone. We're going deep into every single company and making sure that they're legit, to protect the integrity and safety of our job seekers, the integrity of the job board, and we're going to keep going. And now seeing mandates lifting, and now we're starting to break sales records, I'm just blown away. My theory was correct, but there was other theories that I didn't think about that are coming to light that are very positive for what we're doing. So there's a lot of hope.
Yes,
right now.
good.
There's a lot of opportunity, and it's a great time to be an employer looking for staff, because these very strong-minded people, these very individualistic thinking people, these people that are willing to take a social risk, that got publicly ridiculed in their office, who lost their job, they're available now. They're up for grabs, and those are the people you want in your company. Those are the people that you want to lead your crew.
Yeah, that's such a good point too, is if a person has the strength of their individual nature to do this. Yeah, I agree with that 100%. So what's the main website?
Jablessjobs.work, W-O-R-K.
Oh yeah.
Yeah, jablessjobs.work.
Okay, good to know. Yeah, and you're on social media?
Yeah, we're on Twitter, we're on Facebook, we're on Instagram. At Jabless Jobs for all of them. I've got a Getter going now, but I don't hardly use it. We're also on a blockchain server called Wavio. Well, it's Hive blockchain, but we're on the Wavio social media there. We have a social media account, and we're on LinkedIn as well.
Yeah.
At Jabless Jobs on all of them. Jabless Jobs Recruiting is our LinkedIn.
Okay.
So yeah, we just got a YouTube channel going too.
Okay. Well, that's all really good, and it's really neat to see these spontaneous and very positive ways of dealing with the situation we're all in. And I want to thank you for spearheading such a thing. I think it's a great idea.
Oh yeah, man! It feels like it just landed on me, and I just done my best to keep, to roll forward with it. There's a dueling side of this, and I think I found a way to balance them out. Like there's a wonderful economical opportunity with what I got going on. There's a wonderful business opportunity as an entrepreneur. There's a great window of opportunity that I have here. But on the other side, and I have to balance them together, it's a humanitarian effort.
Yeah.
And so this is where I come down to, if there's a potential communist takeover, I'm fighting it with capitalism, but ethical capitalism.
Yeah.
That's why we kept our team small. That's why we had to figure out how to monetize, and we're able to sustain ourselves through this business, and we all just find our roles. We've chosen a lane, we're staying in it, and we're moving forward. I support capitalism, but I also want to stress that I only support ethical capitalism.
Yeah.
And that's, I think, the best way to take on this challenge of a potential communist takeover. Fight communism with capitalism.
That's a good slogan. I like that. And I wanted to. I don't think I'll have this edited up by tomorrow, but you are speaking tomorrow at the rally, right?
Yeah. It's for those people watching. It's March 18th right now.
Yeah.
And it's a Friday. Tomorrow is Saturday, the 19th, and I'm speaking at the Worldwide Rally here in Vancouver. It's going to be at Jackpool Plaza.
Yeah.
It should be good. We've got an example of fighting communism with capitalism. I've hired people across the whole country. I'm paying them to distribute flyers at the rallies, at the worldwide rallies across the country. I'm not asking for volunteers anymore.
Cool.
I'm done with that.
Nice. I'm
paying people. When I call you and I want you to do something for me, I'm paying you. There's a chance for you to make money.
Good for you.
Because we're a company now.
Yeah.
We're incorporated.
Yeah.
And so I've hired I think it's 7 or 8 people to distribute flyers all the way to from Halifax, Toronto. We got them in Calgary, Edmonton. I got a guy in Winnipeg, and Steve, our IT guy, is doing it in Winnipeg. And I'm going to check my phone after this podcast to see if I can confirm someone in the Okanagan.
Ah, okay.
We got a few people going around on it. Yeah, we're using this opportunity to market, and fortunately, there's a lot of people who still don't know about us. Yeah. So that means we got a greater market to tap into.
I bet you do. I really do.
So unfortunately, they haven't heard about us yet, but it's a positive thing for me because I have a lot of people that I can still reach out to that don't know about us yet.
Awesome. Well, I wish you the best.
Yes.
I really hope to hear more of the story as it evolves too, because it's a very interesting story. I mean, there's a whole side of this that we didn't get a chance to get into where just the opportunity for a business comes up and you develop a business and it turns into be more successful than you expect. And that's an interesting story in the entrepreneurial side of it too. And one of the things I try to really impress upon people is you can create a business, and if you have the right opportunity in the right situation, and that's often better than a wage job. But that's a whole different topic in a way.
One of my business mentors, he's awesome. His name is Matt. He just does consultation meetings with me once in a while. I'm so grateful for the guy. He told me this is an era, we're in a period of time right now where people contract, they close up and they don't expand anything. They're too scared to expand. But what they're providing for you is that elbow space. That we're in a time now where it's the best time to try and expand and grow and reach out and take space in that elbow space that the people are leaving for you. That's why I say, like, what I'm doing was gift wrapped to me by the government.
Yeah, I like that take on it, actually, because I mean, in a way, that's what I'm trying to do with the podcast, and I'm finding my own way to try to, to build up my brand, you might say, in that sense. And as I told you before too, before we were recording, I do an online class, and I'm exploring that world that way too. I like that take because it turns a situation that could be looked at a negative way and turns it into a positive. It has that twist.
That everyone wants to stay the same.
Yeah.
People are very troubled with change, and that's fair, but that's why they contract. That's why they close in.
Yeah.
Those of us who are comfortable with change and willing to roll with it can step back and look at a lot of opportunity in this era that we're in.
I like that.
Yeah,
and I hope
there's lots of reason to be positive.
Yeah, I hope people really hear that message and are inspired by it, because I think that every single person that does do that, it doesn't have to be politically orientated at all, but just that they take on their life and say, I'm going to do this thing I really want to do, that I'm driven to do, it helps everybody.
Yeah. I think this era has created a lot more entrepreneurs.
Yeah.
And we can't really measure it yet, but in hindsight, we'll see. A lot more people are going to figure out how to make and sell clothes from home.
Yeah.
And, they've always been good at sculpting, but they never made it into a business until now.
Yeah.
We're going to hear a lot more of these stories.
Okay. Well, I look forward to that, and and good luck tomorrow at the rally.
Thank you.
And good luck in general, and thank you for your time. It's very appreciated, George.
It's great to be here. Thanks for having me.
You bet.